But
I say you were around a
Yeah.
lot of the restaurant business, the hospitality business for a while, so I'm sure you saw and you had a good idea of what had to be done to be
Yeah.
successful.
yeah, absorb as much as possible and try to apply it as best as you can in whatever situation you're in.
So valuable for younger people to sit down. I mean, that when I was in Austin, you know, I was coaching club lacrosse
Yeah.
and high school and club. And you'd see these parents, you'd see, you know, oh, he's a commercial real estate developer, you know, he's a angel investor. And I would just be like, hey, let me buy you lunch. And I would, you know, even though I had,
Is it weird
no,
though? Are kids still doing shit like that?
I don't know.
I don't think that
They
they are.
should. Oh my gosh, how valuable. I mean, think about what their time is, a billable hour,
Yeah.
right? But hey, this is their son's lacrosse coach. You know, they're going to do it for free. They'll half the time they would pay for it. I'd try to pay for it, but they'd
Yeah.
be like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And then you just pick their brain. Who doesn't like to talk about what they've been successful in and the
Sure.
lessons they've learned?
Sure.
And it was like, you know, just that repeat. All of a sudden, like you just have a wealth of knowledge that you're probably not even aware of.
Well, you're not going to read that in a textbook.
No.
You know what I mean?
No, you can't like ask a textbook a certain question or a
Sure.
follow-up question. And, you know, I always say you learn also what not to do, like, you know, from what they've said, or you look at them, you're like, oh, I like how he does this, and this, but I would never want to do that. And it's like, all right, so maybe I'll change it up. I'm sure you saw that in the hospitality business where it's like,
1,000%. Yeah.
because it's changed.
Yeah.
And I'm,
Oh, yeah.
you know, and I think at least it seems like you're kind of on the forefront, especially in Syracuse, of kind of making that shift over of just the traditional, like, you know, this is what we are, your traditional restaurant, to now kind of like a marketed restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, not only is it just good food, but it's maybe health conscious, or, you know, there's something else to it that's another draw. At
Yeah.
least that's what I kind of see from an outsider. And I'm
Yeah.
sure you can talk to, you know, to it a little
Are we
more.
live right now?
Yeah, we're live, man.
Oh,
We just
fine.
go right into it.
Yeah, nice. Hell yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to think about. Like, I'm such like a brand whore, if that's a right word to say. I mean, realistically, right? I love design. I love branding. Like, and I've been, much like you have, to so many major metropolitan areas, like larger cities with, you know, really extravagant restaurants. But, you know, not only is that like brand package kind of like honed in, but all the other bits and pieces of hospitality are also sort of in conjunction and in line with that brand package, right? Whether it's, you know, the menu and its design, whether it's the food and the offerings, whether it's the servers and what they're wearing, whether it's the kitchen staff. Can you see in the kitchen? Can you not? Like it's designed and thought out so specifically in such a way that's going to enhance, I think, the overall user experience. And again, for me, like, that's my ideal restaurant to dine in, right? Or my ideal place to go, or my ideal product to use, if that makes sense, right? Like your phone or whatever else. Like the drink that I drink, I like this drink because I like the branding and it tastes good.
Yeah.
It's really it. So I try to, at least for myself, kind of navigate our brands and what we're offering sort of with that mentality behind me of knowing that I want to, you know, selfishly create an experience that I want to enjoy, right? And if I'm the ultimate critic of my own self, which we always are, right, as humans, how can I now take that to the next level and think about all the other, you know, internal, external factors that are going to make this specific brand, restaurant experience the best?
Yeah. I mean, that's, I guess, what I was talking about, like kind of a new school, that design behind it, right? You think about restaurants in the 90s, or, you know, you don't think of, you think of like your bare bones menu of just black and white writing of what they have. You know, food was probably delicious, but it wasn't necessarily like the preparation of what the food looked like, the design on the menu, you know, like you're saying, what the wait staff was wearing. That's all kind of, I feel like, newer in a way. And I wonder, you know, you think of like, I want good food, I want good food, or I want a good drink, I want a good margarita, or I want a good mixed drink, whatever it is. But you wonder, like, almost subconsciously how much you're willing to go towards something that is designed well.
Sure.
Right.
Well, I think that that's ultimately it. Like how much, I mean, it's such an interesting psychological game when it comes to just like consumer awareness and
Yeah.
consumer, you know, like buying, what the subconscious is able to adhere or at least gravitate towards, right? Whether it's an image, whether it's a smell, whether it's a, you know, there's so many different factors that I think not just hospitality and the restaurant business, but, you know, any industry sort of at least evaluates, in my opinion, to make sure that they're developing and at least, you know, giving a successful product to market.
Yeah. Today's episode of Upstate Impact is brought to you by Renewal by Anderson of Central New York. Summer's here, and it's the perfect time to upgrade your windows. With Renewal by Anderson's exclusive Fibrex material and expert installation, you'll get a cooler, more energy efficient home that looks as good as it feels. Click the link in our show notes to schedule your free quote today. Renewal by Anderson, superior products, exceptional service. Take us back. I remember West Genesee, I think it was my junior or senior
Oh, yeah,
year. I
maybe.
think you were student teaching as a health teacher.
Yeah, I was
right?
once in education.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
You went to
I
Cortland.
went to Cortland State. Yeah, graduated from there with an education degree. I mean, long story short, like once I got into high school, I was I wouldn't say the best student or the best, you know, the most well behaved, I think, human, and my parents did a good job of raising me, much like yours did, right? We grew up from that same sort of community where we did play lacrosse. We knew discipline, we knew work ethic, and we knew like morals and an understanding of like what to do and what not to do. And I still had that, but that was kind of the period of time in my life where I was kind of really experimenting with a lot of, different friend groups and a lot of, extracurricular things that necessarily wouldn't be today, or maybe it is today, right? Good to necessarily do in high school, but it was cool. Like my parents let me sort of experiment and didn't sort of like grab a hold of me too hard to be like, yo, hey, what are you doing? Don't go this way, go this way, and let me kind of figure that out on my own. So that was kind of cool. And like I said, once I got to college, I was still sort of figuring that out. I didn't really know what to do. I think that was, that point in time in my life and, my career where I knew that post high school, I wanted to either, continue to potentially leverage athletics and lacrosse, or I honestly did want to consider going into culinary right after high school. I chose the former, right, and trying to leverage that athletic kind of capacity. It didn't work out as best as I planned, but like I said in like our initial conversation, I learned a lot of valuable lessons, I think along the way that helped me make, I think, that decision a little bit more clear once I got to that point in my life post college where I was like, well, listen, the coaching thing in the education thing is really cool. And I learned a lot of really good lessons in that as far as how to communicate well and articulate information amongst a group of people, right? And now large groups of people, knowing that, the amount of employees that we have. So I thought that was a really interesting, I think, school that I had been to in that education process and being able to teach people, right? Maybe it wasn't, like health based, right? Or, traditional education based, but now I had the capacity and the understanding of how to take what I wanted to learn, which was design and art and culinary in operations as far as hospitality is concerned, and then articulate that to a group of people and find some sort of common ground and understanding so that we could all align and get on this path and this goal to build restaurants. So
you did do a stint of coaching.
I did do a stint,
and I'm
yeah.
sure it helped. At least this is what I see now that I've kind of shifted to more a career that's dealing with adults as opposed to dealing with children or young adults. When you're having to coach a team or manage a team, the younger they are, the more raw emotion they show, right? They're not as sophisticated of human beings. So if you're coming down on someone, you see that they're upset or they're sad, or you make them happy, you see them visibly happy. And it's almost like a good test for you to understand what's good, what makes them feel happy, what gets them upset. And you kind of take those lessons that even though now you're 30 and I'm having that similar conversation, might be work related now, you may not show that you're happy, but I know it makes you feel good, right? Or you may not show that you're kind of pissed at me because you're a professional, but you understand like, hey, when you say stuff like that, it's like a good feedback system to start out in. So then when you do go and start working with adults, and I'm sure, you deal with a lot of people, you have a lot of different restaurants and ventures, that it helps you manage and it helps you be a good leader. And
yeah. I mean, valuable sort of in much like, right, coaching, different subset of, I think, humans and development wise, right, as far as being younger, right, you're post college, or I'm sorry, in college, right, or in high school, because I did coach at OCS for a little bit while once I graduated, and then I was the head men's lacrosse coach at Wells College, which I'm sure you're kind of speaking towards. But yeah, I mean, ultimately it led me to kind of experiment with that sort of that coaching sort of methodology and philosophy that I was eventually, kind of like developing along the way. So, much to, I think, what you said, the younger kids that I at least had, I was able to again, play with a couple like different philosophies that I had in reference to, disciplinary action, or, just articulating information, whether it be a play or here's what we're doing outside of the practice sort of like realm after practice. So it was again a good sort of like learning lesson for my strategy to eventually, become, somebody that was, doing all right in the restaurant business, right?
Yeah.
And apply that kind of like skill set to the way that we, present information and present new concepts and present what we're doing on an operations level and a hospitality level to the people that are around us that believe in, us and myself and what we do and what we're trying to do, and hopefully what they can become if they stick with, again, this program, you know what I mean? Similar to coaching, right? That game plan. So,
And that's so important. I mean, for any business, especially the hospitality business, it's, who do you surround yourself with? Who do you have helping you?
mhm.
You can't, I mean, you can do a lot, but you can't do everything.
No,
You know
and
that.
like again, I think along the way we've been so fortunate, at least now, to have such a strong, operations team, leadership team. And again, I tell them this all the time because we have regular Monday meetings. It's like, we wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for you guys, and I wouldn't have the ability and capacity to be able to, go out and kind of take the operations sort of side of my brain, kind of put it down on the table for a minute and start to think a little bit more strategy, development, brand design for new concept, existing concepts, because we're always thinking about how can we make the things that we offer even better than what they have been before. So, without, like you said before, a strong group of leaders behind, myself, much like your assistant coaches, I wouldn't have the ability to do, nearly what I do today.
You mentioned out of high school, you toyed with getting into like a culinary school,
Yeah.
or so this is something that goes back. This wasn't, you just starting to work in a restaurant business and realize, oh, I think I could make a go of this. I think I
Yeah,
enjoy
I mean,
this.
early on, much like, you or anybody else, and I always advocate for this, like any first job that I think an individual should have should certainly be in hospitality, right? You learn so many social skills. You learn how to talk to different people. You learn how to articulate. Again, I've used that word 1,000 times, but, really give a bunch of information out that you might not know, but you're learning it as you go. So my thought process was, and this was a time where I think that like the Food Network was just becoming like a thing, right? We're talking like late 90s and like the early 2000s, right? Where that was really hitting media like pretty heavy. So I was, again, more or less self-taught. My family had always kind of, come from culinary backgrounds. They weren't chefs or they weren't, like extravagant, like, culinary individuals. They were just really good cooks,
Yeah, they
and they
knew how
really
to
liked
make a good
cooking.
meal.
Yeah. So I was just kind of around and listening and like picking up like, different shit along the way. And like, how do you make, what are you doing right there? And I would just, practice knife skills on my free time and make different dishes that I saw, when I was kind of watching, TV every now and again. I'd pick up a couple cookbooks and just kind of like run through it and be like, I could probably do that. Let's play with that. That's when I started to really like, I think the artistry of culinary, being able to create, from nothing, this beautiful dish with amazing flavors and everything else. And like I said, I'm no chef. I'm just a pretty decent cook. That's, a little bit dangerous, with a lot of other skills, I think, in hospitality. So,
What was your first venture?
yeah.
You mentioned that you worked with some great mentors and, you worked in the industry, but what was the first thing that you're like, I'm going to give it a go to see if I
Yeah.
can do it?
So the first venture that I had was, when I was coaching during this sort of Wells College period in 2012, 2011, myself and a business partner had kind of had conversations, about, doing a food truck and how kind of like low entry that would be. It wasn't really a lot of food trucks, certainly for our market.
So were they pretty popular then?
No, I mean, there really wasn't any. There's a couple, but, it wasn't like it is today where, now you're seeing food trucks, a lot
truck
more on the
parks.
streets, right? There's food
Yeah.
truck parks. There's tons of events put on by the Syracuse Food Truck Association, stuff like that. So we had this idea of, this really cool, food truck called Feast Coast, which subsequently is now kind of our hospitality brand name, right? Feast Coast Hospitality. Never came to fruition. We ended up realizing that, yeah, really cool name, right?
Yeah.
That the food truck game at that point in time, while, was a good entry level sort of like start to get to, a brick and mortar, just didn't think financially it made sense for the amount of efforts that were going to go into that. And again, like I said, the scene wasn't as developed as it is now, so there wasn't a lot of places to go where you could just get a couple hundred people and make some good money. So we decided to kind of bag that, kind of fast forward a few months, maybe even a year. This business partner ends up getting a phone call from another group of guys, and this group of guys ends up being that group of guys that we kind of created a partnership with to start Modern Mall. So that was the first kind of concept that I was involved in, that I had a hand in the design, menu development, and that whole menu sort of like layout, alongside, again, a good mentor and a good friend, Mark Bullis. Shout out Bullis if he's watching right now. I love you. But yeah, I mean, it was a good kind of entry into ultimately what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to, again, design. That excited me. Coming up with brands and brand names and that sort of like ideation that ultimately led to creation. That was something that I was like, damn, this is fun. Like, this is really, really fun. And not to mention, I'm ultimately a people pleaser. Like, I love giving people, right, a smile. I like making them happy, whether it's family, friends, whoever. So that was kind of the first step into the game, for myself. And, kind of snowballed, and I started to, again, get more ideas, and, original grain, and more ideas, Exo Taco, more ideas. We did another original grain, another idea. Let's make hot sauce, right? Another idea. Let's do a ghost kitchen with chicken tenders inside Exo Taco. All right. Kind of weird, but
Yeah.
works out. And now obviously doing a burger concept.
I noticed that, I mean, those are all, obviously you opened a second original grain, but
Yeah.
other than that, they're all pretty different.
Yeah.
Where you think of someone who has a successful restaurant business, it's like, okay, rinse and repeat. Let's go to a different area, do what we're doing, right? And we'll make more money. And like, that's, almost, you see that more often, I feel like, than just creating completely separate ventures.
Yeah.
Because there's probably, you learn some things, but there's probably still a pretty big learning curve when you're changing literally what your offering is.
Yep.
So it's interesting to hear you say, because you're more into the design, right? It's not, if you're doing the same thing, it's not that much change of a design where it's like, no, I want something new, right? I want to be able to create a whole new experience, right? And then maybe you partner with the chef or whoever that's going to create the actual taste experience. But with your passion in design, it gives you a fulfilling next venture.
Yeah.
And that's just interesting. You don't see it as much, and it's pretty cool to see, especially because now it's like, not only can you be successful in making hot sauce or doing what original grain does, kind of original grain with the fast casual healthy food, it's like now you can do tacos, which are awesome.
Sure.
From someone who lived in Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
Moving back up here, the biggest thing we miss, obviously we have some great friends down there, but is food.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is tacos and Mexican. And it's like, for a while we're looking around town, and then I was like, wait, and when I say a while, like a couple months, I'm like, oh, Exo Tacos on the other side. That's like our one fix here of Mexican, right? Is being able to get great tacos like that. So you've done it countless times. And I think, just kudos to you to be able to kind of rinse and repeat, but with something completely different.
I think it's just like, I get an itch, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I also want to, like, selfishly, like I said before, like, do stuff that I like. I love so many different styles of cuisine. I love so many different flavors, different, again, color palettes, much like you do, right?
Yeah.
Well, I guess the easy way would be like, hey, let's just scale this brand and do, multiple Exo Tacos. And that's still on the table. I mean, we're in conversations right now of doing another potential concept, another, Exo Taco, or, even another original grain. That's always out there. But I think for, me here, like, I'm always a big proponent of, making the community better. Like, I want to make my town, like, better. I want to make the city that I grew up in and have lived in for a majority of my life better and the best, right? So if I can create as many, culinary, hospitality offerings as I can, whether it's the same and or different, like, at least I'm making it better. And, selfishly for me, I'm enjoying that sort of style of cuisine for each one, and things that I've grown up to love. So
We've talked about all the successes you've had. Is there anything that maybe we don't know about, or, even if it's just kind of something along the way that you've struggled with, or something that, like, hey, I thought I had this figured out and I didn't? Is there anything you can share from that standpoint?
yeah, I mean, there's so many. There's
Like anyone,
realistically,
yeah.
like, there's so many to name. I think every day there's always that that challenge that you're faced with, right? Or at least a fire to put out that you never maybe put out before. But I think you start to rely on some of the other, fires, and they start to kind of become somewhat similar as far as how you put them out, or at least the way in which you should gravitate towards putting, that out, or finding that difficult position to be less difficult by whatever that is. I would say probably the biggest one was Rochester, right? We had opened up Rochester with high hopes and aspirations. This is obviously an original grain brand, and we ended up closing, probably 3 years after that. So that one kind of stung, obviously, because we poured our hearts and our souls, and we were so hyped up about kind of scaling that brand. And a lot of that had to do with COVID and that whole sort of like environment, right? 6 months after we opened, that happened. So it was like, holy shit. Like, and I'm not I'm not a Rochester guy.
No, yeah,
Nobody, I knew people, but I know a lot more people here, right? I'm from here. I'm from this community. So, I have the community, I think, support a little bit more than I did have in Rochester. So it was difficult, and it was more difficult in that regard. And that was probably one of the biggest difficulties for me, was trying to, get myself into that community faster and harder. But because of the time frame that we're in, it was so difficult to be able to make those connections that way, you know what I mean, and meaningful ones like this, right? And when you're in front of people, not on a Zoom call or shit like that. So that was probably the biggest challenge that I learned from. And I think that from again, if I was to speak to hospitality and my operational team, it was also kind of becoming, a little bit more difficult for them. Staffing was a little bit harder, right? Not a lot of people wanted to work, right? Or at least were incentivized to, not work for a little bit of time. And, we as a leadership team had, to kind of cover those people and those bodies to be able to make it work. So, the back and forth travel for some of my crew from here to Rochester was difficult. And I think that ultimately it was just like, all right, well, if we have an opportunity to kind of pivot and do some other things in town here, which is ultimately what we want to do. And, made, I think, operational sense for us to be like, okay, well, we have lots of other things in Syracuse. It won't be as difficult for our crew. Let's kind of focus on that for a little bit until that point in time comes where we can maybe pick this ball back up again and start to dribble it in the direction that we want to.
It's always a tough balance when you're like, do we keep grinding this out? Maybe it'll be successful. Right? I don't want to be a quote unquote quitter.
Yeah.
But at some point you got to realize, cut your losses.
Yep.
Like you said, you realize we had so many opportunities here locally in Syracuse. That's like, why, it's not working right now. I mean, 3 years, that's a pretty good go. And you decided, to make the judgment call, like, all right, let's cut that, let's focus on something here locally. And clearly, right, you've been able to be successful in more things. Yeah,
that was a gut checker.
It's hard. Oh man, and no one likes to swallow their pride like that.
Well, like you said before, I mean, sometimes you have to put the ego aside, and I think that goes, whether it's a business related issue, whether that's an interpersonal or social related issue with a friend or a family member. It's like, ego aside, like, what's the best possible resolution for the situation that's going to, again, result in the most effective outcomes for either party, right? Or all parties, or maybe just yourself. Sometimes you got to think about that.
You also talk about like the day-to-day fires.
Yeah.
It's, I'm sure you've dealt, having, all the different ventures that you're involved with. I'm sure it happens, like you said, on a day-to-day basis. And you just start to learn how to react to them, right? And that usually is not too much of a reaction. Obviously, if it's very important, you need to address it. But like some days just suck. But it's like it always comes back where you're like, all right, today's gonna suck, but I bet you tomorrow will be good. You don't get an appreciation for it. No one likes a day that sucks. But you kind of like understand that, like, dude, it comes in waves. It's like reciprocal. Maybe by Friday I'll be on top of the world because I got some news about this or that.
Yeah.
And it just seems to always happen that way. It's like not to be cliche, but you can't sweat the small stuff because in the grand scheme of things, a year later, you're going to remember what that fire even was.
I think that that's an interesting, way to look at it. And the way that I sort of combat that, if like, the day is not as ideal as you had planned, right? There's maybe one or two more fires that you needed to handle. And it's, it's kind of wearing on you, whether it's mentally, emotionally, socially, whatever. There's always some sort of like underlying message, I think, in my opinion, to be learned, right? There's always some sort of underlying thing there that you're like, let me soak that for a second and think about that and what that meant now and how I can apply that for the future. So either that doesn't happen again, or at least my reaction to it is a little bit differently, so that I'm at least conveying the information appropriately, so that the outcomes are a little bit more positive than they were on that specific day, or whatever the case may be. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And that's always, in hindsight, a little
Of course.
easier to
Yeah,
talk.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
In the
yeah.
moment, it could be tough, but
Yeah.
like the more you're aware of it, right,
Yeah.
the more you can learn from it, right?
Yeah.
They say you win or you learn.
I think I think it comes with age.
Yeah,
For
I
sure.
think so too. Age and experience.
You learn to kind of let go a little bit, and you're like, all right, I could probably learn from that, and kind of flip the page, move on, and say, all right, well, let's get it done, however we got to.
Let's say city of Syracuse goes on a hunger strike. They are no longer eating, or they're no longer going out to eat, and you are no longer involved with any restaurant business or any food offering. What would you do? What else do you have a passion for? Obviously, you've talked about design,
Yeah.
which there is other ways
Yeah.
you could probably, scratch that itch. But is there anything else that comes to mind? Is there anything along the way that you've been like, hey, I love what I'm doing, but this really interests me?
I mean, I think hospitality, I think, is one of those really interesting things where, you have so many different areas of, culture kind of colliding together, right? Whether it's art, whether it's music, whether it's, branding and marketing, obviously there's the culinary piece, right? Whether it's communications, like there's so many things happening inside a restaurant business that I think that a lot of people just don't really, I think or maybe appreciate. So, to answer, I think, your question, yeah, I mean, there's so many passions that, if, Syracuse were going on a hunger strike,
Yeah.
that would be honestly totally brutal. But hopefully that doesn't happen. But yeah, I mean, the marketing, the branding aspect, like I love that piece about, I think, any industry, right? I love it about tech. I love it about culinary. I love it about hospitality. Like I love it about everything. Social media. I love that. I love doing that and sort of like, giving my staff who handle that some insight into, tips and tricks and, how to do that better. And while I'm constantly obviously still learning to do that. So, I love music. My father was a big musician, big guitar player. So in my free time, when I do get the time, I'm constantly, strumming at a guitar, trying to figure that out. So, played out a few times back in my heyday, yeah, post high school. So yeah, I mean, I think there'd be some things for me to do. I certainly wouldn't be bored. Right. But yeah, I mean, my passion's hospitality. I mean, I love what I do. Like I said, I'm super fortunate to have the ability and the opportunities that I've been given to kind of showcase, I think, my skill set in a way that's, chewable for, I think, the audience, right? Literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, kudos to my team. They do a tremendous job of operating all the businesses, with and without me. And like I said, I mean, we're fortunate and hopeful that we can continue to do a whole hell of a lot more.
It's interesting as you answer that, you kind of realize culinary, in your field, it's a big piece, but it's a piece. Right. So you're talking about the design, you're talking about the marketing, you're talking about the management of a staff, the leadership. It's like you swap that culinary piece out with like a product or a service, especially something that has a demand, you have a successful business, right? Because you have all the other pieces, you've learned that along the way. So yes, that's your passion right now, but God forbid there was a hunger strike in Syracuse. It just shows that like you can, business is business in a way.
Sure.
And it's like, you have not just mastered that culinary part of it, because that doesn't make for a successful restaurant. How many great places who had great food don't make it?
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other pieces, kind of what you talked about.
Yeah. I mean, I think it requires a lot of skills, and a lot of management of those skills, either all the time at the same time or in different bits and pieces kind of throughout the day or throughout the week. So, like I said, I'm super blessed to be able to have the ability to be able to kind of showcase that in the skills that I have kind of gained along the way, whether that's through just learning on my own or, mentors and, talking to people that, before me were really, really good at hospitality that I admired, right? And I still do admire, that I wanted to, either emulate and then continue to do, more, and show them that, hey, I can do that stuff too. And I can do it at a really high level, like everybody else. So it's been a fun ride.
Speaking of doing more,
Yeah.
you got a
Yeah,
new
so we got
a
a
new
new-
venture in the pipeline opening
new
soon.
joint
Talk
we're
about
coming
it.
out with called Double Cheese. So that's going to be a burger concept right out in Liverpool, right in the Village. We ended up getting an opportunity to acquire a property out there. So used to be a former cafe. We've cosmetically made it look really, really awesome. Beautiful burger concept, full bar, smash burgers. We'll have some tenders. We'll do some fun stuff. So yeah, we're excited about this one. That one's kind of been in the back pocket for a while, much like a lot of other ones. But yeah, we're excited for this one.
Speaking of smash burgers, I was down in Texas visiting some friends, and I had a buddy. I've never had a smash burger.
Yeah,
And he made a few on the Blackstone.
Yeah,
His
banger.
Father's Day, listen, or no, actually, my birthday was like 2 weeks after. I was like, I want a Blackstone, and so I've probably made them half a dozen
Quick trip
times
to
already.
Depot, grab the
Yeah, I got one for
Blackstone,
my
yeah.
parents too. I'm like,
There you
yeah,
go.
you guys got to do this too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a great concept because they're delicious. But did you always know you wanted to do another, like, obviously it's something different, but a burger joint?
I only like doing stuff that I want to eat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like if I was to have a food and only one food, as far as like, if you're not going to make it to tomorrow, what's that one food that you really want? It'd probably be just a burger, like a classic cheeseburger, fries, and like I'm a happy man. That's it. So yeah, I mean, for me, I've always loved kind of the simplicity of that cuisine, like just like the cheeseburger, right? How simple it is, but also like it's so complex at the same time. Yeah. So yeah, like I said, the space that we had sort of found really laid out to that in my brain as I'm kind of walking through it, and we're like, maybe this will work. And obviously, I'm asking friends and family and my operational team and my partners of like, hey, what do you guys think? And they're like, oh yeah, that sounds great.
I'd eat that.
Yeah, I'd eat that. It's like, okay, well, of course you would. So yeah, like anything else, we don't know, how successful or, whatever it's going to be. We just try to put our best foot forward in developing, again, a really good brand that serves, really quality, high quality food ingredients that everyone can sort of align with, right? Whether that's from an aesthetics perspective, whether that's from a, like I said, culinary perspective and taste and flavor, or, whether that's just a hospitality and service perspective, as far as like how well we take care of you when you walk in the door.
Well, it's really that experience.
Yeah.
And I think
exactly.
that's pretty common with all your restaurants.
Yeah.
It's more of an experience than just good food.
Sure.
And
I
that's
appreciate
kinda-
that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'm excited to try the new place. I looked it
Yeah.
up on Instagram. Just that picture of a burger with
Yeah.
like the cheese belt.
We're kind of like slow playing this rollout. We're trying to we're getting like little teasers out there. It hasn't been as like, robust of a push as we normally do. But I think that mystique is something that we've been kind of known to do. Just kind of put little trickles in there and get people talking. Like I always say this, word of mouth is the best form of advertising. As much as great as our social medias or our packaging, right? The more that we can get our community members, I think, to talk about like some of the stuff that we're doing, or have connections and communications like this, right? When we're on a podcast and talking to you, and this is going to go out, and people are going to be like, oh, what's he doing?
place in
yeah,
Liverpool.
oh,
Yeah, check it
wow,
out.
I didn't even know
All
about that.
burgers.
Yeah, that obviously makes our lives a little bit easier when people can talk about us and they can hear, the way that, myself or my team or anybody that kind of is in our outfit talk about hospitality and what we want to do. And I think that, people gravitate towards that, because I think that, for us, there's a genuine love for what we do. Like there's a genuine love for trying to not only just create like new stuff, right? There's a genuine love for, I think, the full experience of delivering a good hospitality brand.
So there's no grand opening date, is what you're saying.
We're close. We're super, super close. Yeah.
Okay.
So
will you
we're
do it, or are you sort of like you said, like a slow
yeah, we'll do.
rollout
No,
all
we'll
of a
do.
sudden?
Yeah, we'll do the whole thing. We'll do the
Oh,
grand
okay.
opening,
I don't know
soft
if you
opening.
like get
yeah,
people
yeah.
keeping an eye on it, or
Yeah.
I mean,
We'll make announcements. So if anybody's listening or wants more information, obviously get Double Cheese. That's going to be the Instagram accounts or Facebook, or they can just go to doublecheese.com. There'll be information out there, but we're close. We're super close.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well, best of luck, brother, and
Thanks.
I appreciate you coming on. It's a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me. This
Yeah,
is fun, man.
absolutely.
Great talking to you. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Have you on again when you're starting your next venture.
I hope so. Yeah, looking forward to it. All right, man.
Thanks, bro.
Thanks, bro. Appreciate it. That was fun.